Hey guys, what's going on? It's Indy. With Warlords of Draenor less than 2 weeks away, I want to provide you guys with a guide that can help you out with Holy Paladins in PvP. With beta ending very soon, it's unlikely that some of these things will change, but of course, because it's beta and because it's Blizzard, they are subject to change. And now I'm going to talk about the things that I'm going to be covering in this guide. I'm going to cover the changes from Mists of Pandaria to Warlords of Draenor. I'm going to cover the role of Holy Power. I'm going to cover stat priorities, abilities and passives, the talents and glyphs, and of course, how to play defensively and offensively as a Holy Paladin. God damn it, Michael Megaglow. Let's go over some of the important changes that have been brought to Warlords of Draenor for Holy Paladins. Many instant cast abilities now have cast times, including Word of Glory, Eternal Flame, and Light of Dawn. Holy Light was removed from the game. Kind of. The original Holy Light no longer exists, but Divine Light has been renamed to Holy Light. Divine Favor has been removed from the game, but its effects have been added to the Avenging Wrath spell. Divine Plea has also been removed from the game. Paladin mana costs have been tuned to accommodate this. Guardian of the Ancient Kings is no longer available to Holy Paladins, but it has been compensated for by increasing healing done during Avenging Wrath by 100%. Daybreak now heals every ally within 10 yards of your target for 15%. This is a good change from the 75% split because it has potential to do more healing in large raid group environments and in RBGs. Hand of Sacrifice is off the global cooldown now. This is a huge change because sometimes a DPS would cast a CC on us, and due to being mid-global, we would be aware of the need to use Hand of Sacrifice, but unable to use it. At the same time, you have to be careful because you can accidentally double tap Hand of Sacrifice and waste a charge. I've done this before on beta. Eternal Flame's periodic healing effect has been changed so that its duration now scales with Holy Power. Duration casted with 3 Holy Power ups still has not changed. Illuminated Healing is procced by Eternal Flame Hots once again. Holy Shuck's critical strike chance has been changed from 25% extra to double your normal crit chance. Divine Protection now lasts for 8 seconds, down from 10 seconds. Now, there are some other not so important changes that do affect Holy Paladins, but not as much as the other changes. Seal of Righteousness and Seal of Truth are no longer available to Holy Paladins. Judgment is now free for Holy Paladins, but does not build Holy Power. It's still good to have on your bars, though, so that you can keep in combat, or keep stealth classes in combat. Selfless Healer is only usable on Flash of Light. Selfless Healer now increases the healing of Flash of Light on others by 35% per stack, up from 20%. With the removal of many instant casts, that does make this talent a little bit more attractive for Paladins. Beacon of Light costs a small amount of mana now. Range on denounce has been increased to 40 yards instead of 30. Seal of Insight no longer increases haste by 10%, but Blizzard made up for this by adding the haste to the Infusion of Light, which now passively increases haste by 10%. Redemption mana cost has been reduced to 95%. All this basically does is make it so it's less of a blue bar punishment to revive dead friends. The next thing that we have to cover will be Holy Power, and the role that it plays with Holy Paladins. Holy Power was introduced in Cataclysm, and it's basically like a holy version of combo points. You can generate up to 5 of them, but most abilities only use up to 3. Holy Paladins only have 2 ways to generate Holy Power in Draenor. The first way is your main bread and butter as a Paladin, Holy Shock. It's about a 5-second cooldown, give or take, depending on your haste, and it only generates 1 Holy Power. It can be buffed to generate 3 Holy Power for a certain amount of time if you take the Holy Avenger talent. The second way to generate Holy Power would be to use a spell that you would not use so much as a Holy Paladin, Crusader Strike. As you can see, it does generate Holy Power, and it is affected by the Holy Avenger talent, but you really should never be in melee range of someone. If you're walking by and you can strike a totem, great. If not, don't overextend for it. Holy Paladins really only have one ability to use Holy Power on, and that's either Word of Glory, Light of Dawn, or Eternal Flame. The next part of the guide that we have to go over is going to be stat priorities. The stat priorities for Holy Paladins have changed from Pandaria. Paladins now have more of a focus on haste and mastery than on crit and spirit. The current stat priority should look something similar to this. Intellect, to increase your spell power. Over Mastery, to buff your illuminated healing shield. Then Haste, to reduce the cooldown on Holy Shock and buff Sacred Shield's proc rate. Later comes Crit and Spirit, which are at the bottom due to the fact that mana regen isn't too much of an issue in Draenor, and we get plenty of crit for our Holy Shock from the gear alone due to our passives. The next part of this guide is, get ready, the abilities and passives for Holy Paladins. I'm not going to be going over talents just yet, nor am I going to go over the ones that are not important for PvP. First off, we got to cover Avenging Wrath. Avenging Wrath is a major cooldown for Holy Paladins. It increases all healing done by 100% as well as increasing haste, crit, and damage for 20 seconds on a 3-minute cooldown. Next up is Beacon of Light. It still functions similarly to how it used to, however it's now affected by multi-strikes, and a cool little feature that I missed in my mana guide is the fact that when you heal your beacon target directly, you no longer gain holy power, but instead are refunded 40% of the mana cost of the heal. Next up is the Cleanse ability. Cleanse hasn't changed much, it's an 8-second cooldown that can dispel anything except curses. Next up is Crusader Strike. Crusader Strike's a good ability to have on your bars in case you're close enough to whack someone for holy power, but don't ever overextend to go get that holy power. Coming up next is Denounce. Denounce is capable of preventing the affected target from critting, so make sure that if you can cast this on DPS who are using cooldowns, especially warriors who pop Recklessness, do it. Next up, Devotion Aura, or as many veteran paladins like to call it, Aura Mastery. This is your free casting ability. It makes you and your party or raid members immune to silence and interrupt effects. In addition, it also reduces magic damage taken by about 20%. It can be glyphed to cut down its cooldown by a minute, however, it'll only affect you instead of your group. Next up is Divine Protection. Divine Protection is basically a paladin's bark skin. Unglyphed, it reduces magic damage by 40%. It helps slot versus wizard cleaves. If we face melee, however, we can glyph it to reduce melee damage and magic damage by 20% each. Up next is Divine Shield. Probably the most popular and signature paladin move of all time. It's also known as Bubble. It makes you immune to damage and spells for 8 seconds and reduces damage dealt by 50%. It'll give you Forbearance, which makes you unable to use similar buffs for about 30 seconds. It can be dispelled by Mass Dispel or Shattering Throw. Up next is Flash of Light. It's basically a paladin's flash heal, very fast. It heals for the same amount as Holy Light, but it's double the cost of mana and has a faster cast time. Very efficient for PvP. It can be glyphed to increase the healing taken by a target by 7%. Really quick, we also need to cover Holy Light. It's your slower heal. It heals the same amount as Flash of Light, but costs half the mana and has a longer cast time. Up next is Hammer of Justice. It's a 1-minute cooldown stun that lasts for 6 seconds. It can be turned into Fist of Justice with a talent which cuts the cooldown down to about 30 seconds and increases the range. The next important ability for Holy Paladins is Hand of Freedom. It's probably one of the most important abilities because it removes all snares and roots and makes targets immune to them for the duration. It can be increased to 2 charges with Clemency, and it can also be dispelled. Similarly, Hand of Protection also can be increased to 2 charges with Clemency, and this ability immunizes the target to all melee and physical attacks for 10 seconds and gives them Forbearance. Hand of Sacrifice is another hand ability that can be increased to 2 stacks with Clemency. It reduces the damage taken by the target by about 30% and redirects that damage to the Holy Paladin. It's good to throw this on enemy teams' kill targets right before you get CC'd as it will break CC. It's also a great damage mitigation cooldown. Holy Radiance is essentially a huge AoE heal which grants 1 holy power, effective for RBGs and raids, not so effective for arena, has a very large mana cost. Holy Shock should be used off cooldown. It's your main holy power generator. It can also crit to give you Infusion of Light, which will make your next Holy Light or Holy Radiance a very fast cast. Judgment has no real purpose for Holy Paladins other than keeping people in combat or getting in combat, unless you take the talent Selfless Healer. Light of Dawn is really only useful in raiding or RBGs. It's a good AoE heal that can use holy power if you don't want to use it on Words of Glory. Rebuke is basically the Paladin kick. It's only a melee interrupt, so you really shouldn't be using it that often. However, if you find yourself in a little bit of a pickle, you can interrupt a caster and run out. Redemption is your resurrection ability. There's really nothing special here at all. Seal of Insight is really the only seal that you're going to use as a Holy Paladin. It increases healing done by 5%. Turn Evil is a really important ability for Holy Paladins. It fears undead, demons, or aberrations. It's ridiculously overpowered to use this on things like Warlock pets, DK Gargoyles, or Priest, Shadow Fiends, and Mindbenders. Word of Glory is what you spend your holy power on. It does more healing the more holy power you spend on it, but you can never spend more than 3 holy power on this ability. It's your main holy power dump as holy. Well guys, it's time to go over the passives. Daybreak. It makes it so that when you cast Holy Radiance, your next Holy Shock does an AoE heal on top of the heal on the target. Improved Daybreak down here also increases the healing done by this by about 100%. Empowered Beacon of Light makes it so you heal your beacon target for 10% more. This keeps it so you have to swap beacons on the targets that are being trained. Enhanced Holy Shock is a passive talent so that your Flash of Light and Holy Light have a 10% chance to make your next Holy Shock not trigger a cooldown. This means 2 Holy Shocks in a row, and that means 2 extra holy power. Improved Forbearance reduces the cooldown on Forbearance by 30 seconds, making it last only 30 seconds instead of a minute. Infusion of Light is probably the most important passive for Holy Paladins. It procs on every Holy Shock critical strike, and when it procs, it reduces the cast time of Holy Light or Holy Radiance by 1.5 seconds, making it almost instant. It also increases your haste passively by 10%. Sanctified Light makes it so you gain 5% more crit from all sources, and this pairs really well with Infusion of Light. Don't worry guys, next up is the talents and glyphs, and this isn't as long as the abilities. Level 15 talents deal with speed increases. The best ability is most likely Speed of Light because it's on demand, 70%, and it can be paired with other effects like Hand of Freedom. The level 30 tier of talents focuses on crowd control for Holy Pallies. This will change depending on what comp you're playing with. Take the stun if the comp doesn't have many stuns. Take Repentance if your comp doesn't have a polymorph type spell. And take Blinding Light if your team doesn't have a disorient effect. This tier is very much up to you to decide with the help of your teammates. The level 45 tier takes care of your utility healing. I found that in Warlords of Draenor you have a lot of freedom with this tier depending on what you're doing. Selfless Healer is still the weaker of the 3, I personally feel. But I do think it has some viability since the healing increase has been buffed. Eternal Flame is probably best for things like RBGs and raiding where you can spread your heal over times. However, Sacred Shield is probably the best for Arena due to the fact that it's a passive absorb that cannot be dispelled. Level 60 has some pretty clear talent choices depending on what you're doing. If you're in RBGs, take Unbreakable Spirit no matter what, unless you're in Warsong Gulch and Twin Peaks. In that case, take Clemency so you can freedom the flag carriers. In arenas, you should take Clemency almost every time, unless you come across a double dot comp like Unholy DK Affliction Lock Healer, in which case you'll take Hand of Purity to reduce the dot damage. In Pandaria, Divine Purpose used to be competitive with Holy Avenger. In Warlords, since Word of Glory and Eternal Flame are cast times, I feel that the healing increase offered in Holy Avenger is much better than a reproc on Word of Glory. Also, since Paladins have many cooldowns removed, it's good to have an extra cooldown. Level 90 really only has one talent choice, Holy Prism, because with the removal of many instant casts, it's still an instant cast, has a very short cooldown, and really just heals for a lot. Light's Hammer or Execution Sentence might be better in PvE scenarios, but not so much in Arena or RBGs. Next up, the level 100 talents, the ones that everyone is curious about. Beacon of Faith is a secondary Beacon of Light. I don't feel that this is a great talent because with Beacon of Light Glyph, you can actively swap beacons and maintain the mana regen. This talent, however, might be decent for fighting when enemies have a lot of spread pressure and dots. Beacon of Insight can be put on an ally to increase the healing taken by the Pally's next heal by 30%, and once healed it'll jump to the nearest target. You can only apply one of these, and it may be a decent talent though, because it does remind me of Unleash Elements on Shaman, because they both increase healing done on a target and have a 15-second cooldown. The only difference is that the Paladin version jumps targets much like a Priest's Prayer of Mending. Saved by the Light is my personal favorite, because it's kind of like a Paladin's version of Cheat Death, except stronger. When the Paladin or the Paladin's Beacon of Light target drops below 30% health, you grant the injured target a shield, absorbing 30% of the maximum health. This effect can only occur once per minute, per target. It's sort of like a Priest's Angelic Bulwark, except on other targets. Next up are the Glyphs. I'm only going to be covering the major glyphs due to the fact that the minor glyphs don't really provide you any benefit besides aesthetic bonuses. There are two mandatory glyphs. The first one is Glyph of Flash of Light. When you Flash of Light a target, it increases your next heal done to that target within 7 seconds to be increased by 10%. The next mandatory glyph is Glyph of Beacon of Light. It makes it so that swapping your beacon target triggers no global cooldown. This is important for when enemies make swaps on your team's targets. The final major glyph is up for debate, but can change depending on who you fight. If you're fighting melee, you probably want to take Divine Protection to give yourself a 20% damage reduction versus them. You might take the Blessed Life glyph if you fight wizards and don't need the 20% melee damage reduction. Another contender if you fight melee DPS and you're the only caster on your team is that you can take the Devotion Aura glyph so that your cooldown on Devotion Aura will be back up faster. Now that we've gone over all of that stuff, I'm going to give you guys some tips and tricks on how to play defensive and offensive as a Holy Pally. Like most healers, Pallies can be offensive and defensive, but Pallies are mostly known for being defensive due to the structure of the class. Hand of Sacrifice, Hand of Protection, Divine Shield, all of these abilities just scream defensive usage. But not many people realize that these abilities are great to be used aggressively. But first we're going to go over the defensive usages. For defense, Hand of Sacrifice can be used to mitigate 30% damage on a target being trained. Hand of Protection can be used to stop physical damage from being received on a target. Hand of Freedom can also be used to free someone of snares and roots so that they may kite. Divine Shield can be used to immunize yourself from damage as well as a CC breaker. Devotion Aura can be used so you can freecast heal yourself or your allies without worrying about being kicked. Speed of Light can be used to run away from CC or melee. Use Denounce on enemy DPS to reduce their damage by taking away their ability to crit. These defensive abilities can also be used offensively. Only go offensive if you know your team is okay and has the potential to score a kill. Ways to use your abilities offensively are the usage of Hand of Sacrifice preemptively to break CC on you so that you may keep your team offensive. Use Hand of Protection on casters if you're fighting physical DPS so that they can free cast damage into the enemy team without being interrupted. Use Hand of Freedom on melee or ranged so that they can chase the enemy team while they try to peel and pull back. Use Devotion Aura so that your casters can free cast damage without worrying about being interrupted. Use Speed of Light to chase down an enemy healer or DPS and then combo with Hammer of Justice or Fist of Justice to stun them. You can use Denounce, Holy Shock, Crusader Strike, and Holy Prism on enemy targets to deal damage and help your team put the pressure and go offensive. Jesus Christ, guys, we went over a lot of shit. So to recap everything we've covered, in this guide we went over Holy Paladins in Warlords of Draenor so far. We went over the changes from Mists of Pandaria to Warlords of Draenor. We went over the role of Holy Power in the class. We went over the stat priority for Holy. We went over abilities and passives available to Holy Paladins. We went over the recommended talents and glyphs for Holy Paladins. And we went over some tips and ways to play both offensive and defensive as a Holy Paladin. I hope that you guys found some of this information helpful, and I'll catch you guys later. Indy out.